I read so many books that I'm getting tired just from holding them up for the thumbnail. I mean, these are some big boys. Oh god. Hello, beautiful people of the internet. How are you doing today? My name is Jackie and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today in this video, I am going to be reviewing all of the books that I read in the month of March. In the month of March, I read 10 books. I think that is the most books that I've read possibly ever, definitely since I started my booktube channel. That was a total of 3,879 pages and an average star rating of 3.625. My actual page count was slightly lower because one of these chunkers I did not read the whole thing this month. I had carried it over from a previous month, but still a lot of pages. I don't know how I did it. In the month of March, I participated in 'Tis the Damn Readathon, which was a Taylor Swift themed readathon, and I do have a whole reading vlog about what I read for that, so make sure to check out that vlog if you want to hear more about the books I read for the readathon. Because I already have that video going over my thoughts, and I have so many books to review, I'm going to try to be brief, keyword being try, when reviewing some of these books. So anyone who wants to hear more, go watch that video. And there are timestamps, so if you just want to hear about one book in particular, you can skip to that section of the video. The first book I read in March was for the readathon, and it was The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton, which I really enjoyed. I gave it 4.5 stars. This is a historical mystery set in early 20th century England, and it follows the death of Evelyn Hardcastle, the daughter of the wealthy Hardcastle family, who has recently returned home from abroad. At her welcome home party, a large cast of characters are assembled, and one of them is her murderer. Our main character has to find out who killed Evelyn, and so every single day, for 8 days, he wakes up in the body of a different one of the guests at the house. He has to figure out who killed Evelyn by the end of the final day in order to return to his real life, and if he is not successful, then his memory will be wiped and he will begin the process anew over and over again until he either fails for good or is able to return home. I would describe this book as Downton Abbey meets Agatha Christie meets a body-switching plot, and overall I thought this book was a lot of fun. It was immersive and engaging and really cleverly plotted. There were lots of little things going on that ended up being relevant later, and there was just so much information to process in this book that it was hard for me to theorize who I thought the killer was, because there was just so much information that I was trying to keep track of in my brain. I thought this was a really entertaining story, almost cinematic in its quality, and Netflix has gotten the rights, so I am very excited to see a potential 7.5 Deaths miniseries. I did have a few minor issues with this book, which is why I did not give it a full 5 stars, and you can learn more about that in my Goodreads review, which I will link in the description, and in the aforementioned readathon vlog. Also in that vlog, I do talk about some potential fat phobia with this book. I know it is something that other readers have discussed, and I definitely understood where they were coming from, so if you want to know more about that issue before picking up this book, I talk about it in the vlog. Next, I want to talk about a book I read for history class. I don't have a lot to say about it, and that is The Family in Renaissance Florence, Book 3 by Leon Battista Alberti. I did not give this book a rating. It is very short. However, I will just say that Studying the Renaissance in my history class this semester has made me realize that I am so impossibly glad I was not a woman in this time period, because they had to deal with so much. Reading this book so infuriated me. I wished I had a time machine so I could go back to Renaissance Florence, gather up all the women and say, come with me to the future, I can save you. You don't have to put up with this anymore, because God. These men are awful husbands and just generally sexist people. Would not recommend. Speaking of things I would not recommend, I then read for my class on the rise of the novel Pamela by Samuel Richardson. I gave this 2 stars. Honestly, it was not as awful as I thought it would be. I have heard people describe this as the worst book of all time, and I do think it had a few bright spots. However, they were few and far between. Pamela is the story of our title character, Pamela, who is a teenage servant, and when her wealthy employer dies, she now works for said employer's son, Mr. B, who begins sexually harassing her. I cannot even call it a courtship because his behavior is so abhorrent. This book is definitely triggering, and it displays abhorrent behavior and problematic behavior that is not condemned as awful as it really is, which I think is the biggest reason why this book does not hold up today, even though it was a huge success at the time. And I will not say anything more because I have an entire video on Pamela discussing if it is as bad as people say it is. So if you want to hear more of my thoughts and the history of the novel Pamela, go watch that video. I will link it in the description below. Now we can finally talk about a book that I enjoyed a little more. The next book that I read for the readathon was Jane Steele by Lindsay Fay. This is a book I have been meaning to read for a really long time, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. Jane Steele is a reimagining of the classic novel Jane Eyre, in which our title character, Jane Steele, is a serial killer. She commits her first murder at a young age and then eventually becomes the governess for the wealthy Mr. Thornfield, with whom she develops a romantic connection, though he does not know about her murderous past. Overall, I thought this was a fairly enjoyable book, and I like the creative spin it took on the original Jane Eyre story and the nods to Jane Eyre throughout. I also really liked how the romance was developed in this. I feel like I frequently complain about romances in my videos, and that's not because I don't like romantic plots, I really do. I just often feel like the relationship is rushed and not developed properly. However, the relationship between Jane and Mr. Thornfield is not rushed. It's not like they see each other and fall in love immediately. It is a more realistic and developed connection. Now, I honestly have already forgotten several elements of this book. I think, though it was fun while I was reading it, it's not a book that is going to resonate with me forever, but if you are a fan of Jane Eyre retellings who is interested in this, I think it is a good book to pick up. Next, I read He Started It by Samantha Downing, which I gave a tentative 4 stars. Now I wonder if maybe it was more of a 3.5. However, I did enjoy the book while I was reading it, hence why I gave it a 4. He Started It follows 3 siblings, Eddie, Beth, and Portia, who, in order to receive an inheritance from their recently deceased grandfather, must recreate a road trip they went on as children. But there are some disastrous results, and they realize over the course of the trip that somebody is following them. I really loved Samantha Downing's previous book, My Lovely Wife, which was one of my favorite thrillers I read last year, and I think something this book shares with My Lovely Wife is an incredibly twisted cast of characters. Samantha Downing writes unlikable characters really well. If you are someone who needs a hero to root for in your book, don't read this, because none of the characters are meant to be liked. Overall, I had fun with this book, and the ending was crazy. A little bit unbelievable, I understand that, but overall it was a fun book while I was reading it. I do think it could have had more concrete foreshadowing, and though some people said they thought the plot was slow and boring, that was not my personal experience. I liked this overall, and I will definitely be checking out Samantha Downing's next book when it is released. Next, once again from my class on the rise of the novel, I read Evelina by Frances Burney. I ended up giving this 4 stars. Frances Burney was a very popular author in the vein of Jane Austen. She wrote novels of manners and social satire, and Jane Austen was a huge fan of her books. They were an inspiration for her. This follows the title character Evelina as she leaves home to make her entrance into the London social scene, where she receives both positive and negative attention from male suitors. Evelina is also the unrecognized daughter of a wealthy man, and so those close to her want him to finally acknowledge her as his legitimate daughter. While this is thematically similar to Jane Austen novels, it is not as realistic as Austen. There are some totally ridiculous shenanigans that go on in this book. At times, it is almost soap opera-like. Though it is a bit unbelievable, I did have fun with this book overall. If you are a Jane Austen fan, I would recommend Frances Burney to you. My one complaint is I feel like the characters were not as well-rounded as the characters in an Austen novel. I feel like Burney's characters are either good people or they are bad people with not a lot of complex character motivations like you see in Jane Austen's works. But overall, I thought this was a fun book, and if you are an Austen fan who has run out of Austen novels to read, I think you should pick up Evelina. Okay, guys, it is time for my unpopular opinion. The next book I read was If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, and I gave this book 2 stars. I know, let me explain. This is an extremely popular dark academia novel that follows a group of Shakespearean theater students, and one of them is murdered. Now, this book was so hyped, but to me, it just read like a Shakespearean knockoff of The Secret History. I felt like this book needed a stronger point of view, and it often uses Shakespeare references as a crutch. It really messes with the flow of the story. The characters fell flat for me. I did not emotionally connect with any of them, and they made such terrible decisions that it was frustrating. There were things that they clearly should have done that they just chose not to do because they're dumb, because the plot requires them to make all the wrong choices. I know so many people in the book community love If We Were Villains, and I do think it had strong writing at times. I think the author clearly knows how to write. I just think that the creative choices and the plot development of this book did not work for me, and I found it very underwhelming. I guess because this book was so hyped, I was expecting something on par with The Secret History, which I did really enjoy, but I feel like this book needed a stronger point of view and more fleshed out characters. That's why I did not really enjoy it. But a book that I did really enjoy was Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I gave this 5 stars. One of my new favorite books of all time. When I was a kid, I had an abridged version of Little Women that I read so often the spine fell apart and I had to get a second copy. Until now, I had never read the full version, and I was so worried that I wasn't going to connect with the story like I used to, but I thought this book was an absolute delight, and I loved it. I think you probably know what this book is about. It follows sisters Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy living during the end of the American Civil War. It's been adapted into multiple films and a mini-series. Future episode of Adaptation Battle. Let me know in the comments if you would like to see it. I love this book because it just gives me such warm and fuzzy feelings. When I was a child, Jo was my favorite sister, and though I still really love her, I think I have a better appreciation for the other sisters now, especially Amy, who I find to be absolutely hilarious, and I love her development as a character. This book just has the vibes of a warm hug. And I know not everybody loves how the book ends and who ends up with whom, but personally, I think it is almost perfect, and I love how everything worked out. I think this book shows that as we grow up, our dreams can change, and that is totally valid. Also, let me know if you would like to see a full video on my Little Women unpopular opinion about whom Jo ends up with, because, no spoilers for those of you who haven't read this and don't know how it ends, there is a certain character that a majority of readers say Jo should have ended up with, but in the book she ended up with someone else instead, which a lot of people do not like. However, I think the person that Jo actually ended up with was a much better fit for her, and I have a million reasons as to why I think that. That is my Little Women hot take. So let me know if you want me to make a whole video about that. I have some feelings. Okay, almost done, I promise. I read so many books, but the next book that I read for my class on the Renaissance and Reformation was The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. Yes, there is a sticker on the cover. I do not know why the college bookstore did this. I am sorry that there's a giant sticker obscuring the cover. I did not give this a rating because honestly I wasn't really sure how to rate it. This is an iconic work that has really just become universally known. Machiavellian is a common term now, and this is a book that Machiavelli wrote to one of the Medicis, advising him on how a prince should act in order to maintain his power. Machiavelli says that if you cannot be both feared and loved, then you should choose to be feared, and basically recommends ruling with an iron fist to establish absolute power. And it's conflicting because I think if you are trying to be an absolute monarch, Machiavelli's advice is good advice. The problem is, it's completely amoral advice, and I do not think any person would want to live under a ruler like Machiavelli describes. However, I did read an article from my history class after I finished reading The Prince, in which one scholar argues that when Machiavelli wrote The Prince, he was not being serious. It was actually intended as a work of social satire, and all of the scholars who for centuries have taken him seriously had a misunderstanding of the text. And while that is a debatable point with not a lot of evidence, I just love to imagine that Machiavelli was lying through his teeth when he wrote this, and he is turning over in his grave right now, hating how he has become the OG representation for the evil Slytherin type. And lastly, what is arguably my biggest achievement for the month, I finally finished reading The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is an absolute tome that I have been working on and off for a year. I finally finished it and I can give it 4 stars. I feel like I have described this book in so many videos because I have been meaning to finish it for so long. This is a standalone epic fantasy and it follows multiple kingdoms, some that are more Eastern inspired and some that are more Western inspired, and it includes dragons, a sapphic romance, a large cast of characters. All in all, this was an extremely entertaining read. It had some plot twists that actually made me gasp. It had characters that I loved. I really enjoyed the romance. I thought it was done exceptionally well. The book also includes many queer characters and characters of color. I think one issue I have with this is because it is a standalone, some things were not as developed as I would have liked. However, Samantha Shannon is planning to do further books in this universe that maybe do not follow the exact same characters but take place in an interconnected world. So I would be interested in picking up any potential spin-off books to see this universe fleshed out more fully. I would recommend this book, and don't feel bad if it takes you a long time because it took me literally a year. So, beautiful people of the internet, we did it. I feel like I have been talking for an eternity, but those are all the books that I read in the month of March. Possibly my best reading month ever. You be the judge. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video, and let me know in the comments section, what did you read in the month of March? Have you read any of the books that I read this month? If so, do let me know what you thought of them. Please give this video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed, and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more from me. I post new bookish videos every single Wednesday. My social media links are down below if you want to follow me on Tumblr, Instagram, or be my friend on Goodreads. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an enthralling rest of your day. Bye, and I hope to see you in the next video.